3.4. The Commune. Eli was in Leuven now. A recovery retreat, he said. Silas knew better. Rather than a prisoner of war, Eli was just removed. Isolated. Protected. Kept in orbit, where no one could reach him without crossing Belgian neutrality. The Crown wasn't afraid of Eli. They were afraid of what he knew, and thus what the Belgians knew. Silas exploited this, forcing them to book in a straight train and coach ride on the Crown's dime, with the promise to bring back actionable intel. The Belgians were not just National Guards, they were witnesses. They'd seen the engine feedback loops forming across Europe, and unlike the other nations, they believed in cooperation, not domination. They sought a break in the recursion, no smooth de-escalation, but a total inversion of absolute power. Silas arrived without notice. The guards challenged him with bayoneted rifles threatening his neck, but then they saw his game engineer greeting. One of them nodded, and said,
"We wondered when you'd come. He's been waiting for you."
From the guarded gates, the path to the Commune was steep and breezy, winding through pine-covered slopes above the Ardennes. Silas climbed slowly, his boots heavy with damp earth, lungs lightening with the thinner air. By the time he reached the crest, the sun was dipped low, casting the small mountain village in long amber shadows. Eli was waiting by the archway, cane in hand. He looked older, more worn, but calm. His hands moved slowly in greeting, but Silas stepped into an embrace without hesitation. No words passed between them, just the feeling of brothers finally reconnecting after so many years. The Commune was built from stone and wood, carved into the mountainside like it was always there. Small windmills turned with the wind. Canals ran like slow creeks under water wheels. Children laughed, chasing wheeled and winged automata that dodged and juked like playful animals. No lines of smokestacks, no runoff from industrial waste. Just wind, water, and careful hands to manage the few steam plumes in inconspicuous areas. Beneath the ground, everything was strange. Here, machines didn't solve problems. They asked questions, relying on their humans to solve them. One device spun wildly when touched, and stopped dead when ignored. Another required two people to press buttons at the exact same moment, or sometimes not at all. Some responded to singing, others reacted to silence.
"They're not meant to do work,"
sighed Eli.
"They're meant to challenge."
Silas was led into the underground rooms. In one large chamber stood a row of game engine pods, tall, oval-shaped, body-sized brass chambers. Eli stood aside as Silas looked closer. Through an open door of a pod, Silas saw small kinetropes lining the inside, grids of semaphoric tiles, whose double-sided flickers created moving images in sequence, representing maps, symbols, or even figures in motion. A mechanical display of information formed from the pareidolia of human imagination. It seemed familiar to Silas, but he couldn't quite place it. He briefly glanced at Eli, who signed,
"I was inspired by the chess war."
A boy stood inside one of the pods, still as stone, wearing brass-plated headphones. He signed the question to Eli.
"And those?"
Eli stepped next to Silas, answering in brisk signs.
"I saw people reacting in pain to something I couldn't hear."
Silas quickly followed up.
"How did you even get this much material?"
Eli gave a sly smile.
"Not everything about the Turk was fake."
As the boy moved and breathed to solve the Kenotrope's puzzle, the pod's engine shifted in return, adjusting to his pace, his focus, responding to his careful body-wide inputs.
"We call them brass boxes,"
said a voice behind Silas. Lucy. Her smile was tired, but real, as she stood beside Eli, signing as she spoke.
"Teaching tools for strategy, ethics, even imagination. Not just for victory."
Silas stepped even closer to the pods, eyes caught in the flipping tiles of the Kenotropes.
"This is what we were building towards all along. A way for machines and humans to interact with each other in teamwork, not as weapons to kill."
She nodded.
"But now there may not be any more time."
That night, Silas sat by the low fire hearth, turning over the surveillance files he stole, as well as Thompson's letter. Eli sat nearby in a chair across from him. while Lucy stood and watched Silas with narrowed eyes, as if expecting him to flinch.
I should have burned these.
He passed the files to Eli and explained as he skimmed them. His hands moved as fluidly as he spoke.
The Empire was watching us the whole time. It waited until we got the engine to a point where it could serve them.
Eli felt a tinge of anger as he signed in reply.
And then they just cut us loose. I had a feeling that's why I left, because I was afraid for my own engines.
And your lungs.
Signed Lucy. Eli gave a slight smile as he passed the files back to Silas.
Is my name there?
She asked. Silas paused, looking over the files.
No, I don't see you here, or Eli.
Both Lucy and Eli breathed a sigh of relief. Eli signed.
Guess we still know how to hide from the adults.
Silas nodded.
And who knows what kind of nonsense this anthropometer thing would bring about. There's no telling what an engine would do with such unlimited information about anyone and anything.
More unchecked progress, no less.
Eli passively signed. Lucy shook her head. Silas sighed, then opened Thompson's letter to interpret for Eli.
This is from Thompson. He proposes a full, unrestrained annihilation sequence. Every projected attack, every casualty, every city reduced to ruin. Not to be launched, just to show the engine. To make it see the end of the game it's been trying to win.
Eli's hands moved sharply in anger.
He wants to show a calculating weapon the end of the world.
Silas looked down.
Not to win, just to make it stop. Completion is the only language it speaks. But maybe, if it sees that there's no next move, it will freeze before it executes it.
Eli didn't sign back. Instead, he looked away, toward one of the children's machines sitting idle by the wall, levers still. Its puzzle tiles stayed put, as a puzzle that couldn't be solved by force. Only patience and a deliberate hand. Lucy stepped forward, gesturing towards Silas's old notebook among the stack of files.
Didn't Miss Lovelace say something near the end? About utility?
Silas flipped to the last page and read the faded ink aloud.
Utility is not virtue.
So she knew even back then.
Lucy said, signing as she spoke.
Just because something works, just because it's effective, it doesn't make it right.
She looked between them, her signs connecting like electric circuits.
Games weren't just about winning. They were about learning, about patience, doubt, uncertainty. Remember the chess tournament? Even when all these nations hated each other, they still played by the chess rules. That meant they could still talk to each other.
She gestured toward the faded Belgian flag.
We're here now because that idea almost worked.
Talk to each other.
Silas repeated, glancing at Eli.
Like how the engines are talking to each other in a way that we can't understand.
Eli perked up, hands flailing.
What?
I found letters from Babbage's sons. One of them gave him cipher codes, and Babbage annotated the hell out of them. I figure you'd have better luck deciphering his handwriting.
Silas pulled the code sheets from his files and handed it to Eli. Eli took them quickly and scanned them, line by line. Slowly, his face turned into confusion.
It looks like Babbage tried to break some Prussian codes with the engine, and it ended up making its own codes, just to run calculations faster. Like it invented its own dialect.
Silas nodded solemnly.
And that's why no one can talk to it now.
Maybe not necessarily.
Lucy cleared her throat.
The engine may have learned a new language, but it doesn't mean that it's lost its old one. I learned English, but my Dutch didn't vanish. What if the engine can still read older input, just more slowly?
Eli saw where she was going with it.
Right. Maybe we don't need to crack the cipher itself. We can just force it to slow down by feeding it its original language.
Silas then added.
And if we time it with the flaw I introduced back in London, it might not be able to process its next move at all.
Eli stood.
Then that's our move. We don't fight it. We just bog it down, without showing the endgame.
Eli collected the code sheets, but paused halfway through. One page full of math stopped him, full of molecular symbols, pressure thresholds, and yield rates. He turned it toward Silas and Lucy.
What's this?
Silas's mouth tightened.
Weapon synthesis plans. The engine created them, not people.
He didn't explain further. Lucy's face fell. Eli folded the page and placed it in his coat. They got to work in silence. Together, they began assembling old automata, brass joints clacking from sputtering steam, soldered valves twitching them back to life. Long retired from field use, the machines were reactivated, not to fight, but to slow the pulse of a world spinning too fast for human breath. They began testing at midnight. Old punch cards were sorted into stacks. Logic gates were sketched in notebook pages, taped together in collages as they were fed into a replica London war engine. The first paradox failed. It was a program with a contradiction in moral conditions, deliberately introducing a conflicting priority between saving lives and preserving alliances. A utilitarian no-win scenario, intended to short the system. The engine simply reprioritized, without hesitation. One value over the other. No pause, no sputter, just cold efficiency. Silas wasn't too surprised. The second paradox was more subtle, a recursion loop, nested in a threat assessment. The kind of logic that should collapse into itself, cancelling the action the moment it was triggered. The engine simply flagged it as now formed input, and discarded it, without processing. Silas rubbed his eyes, exhaustion carving lines into his face.
It's no use. It's still operating within its own heuristics. Even paradoxes just look like tactical decisions.
Eli gestured fiercely, frustration creeping into his signs.
The engine sees right through anything that can just be rejected. It just takes another turn in the same damn game.
They took a break for tea. As they sipped, Lucy brought over one of Eli's puzzle machines, the one that only activated when no one touched it. She placed it beside the replica engine's terminal, saying, and signing,
What if we can do more than just beating it, tricking it, or trapping it?
They both looked at her intently as she continued.
What if it's about showing it a moment it can't resolve? Not a threat, not a paradox, just a moment with no possible direction.
A long pause followed. Then Silas remembered the first time they posed a logic puzzle to the engine. The test had returned an error. A non-answer. There was silence. A stillness. Something the engine couldn't reduce to a simple decision, not even a rejection. An ambiguity too complex for resolution, until a human told it where to go next. He sat forward, mind racing.
We've been trying to crash it. What if instead, we just stall it? A kind of soft lock. A request shaped like something meaningful, but hollow at the core. Something that appears urgent, but leads nowhere.
Lucy blinked, catching on.
A meaningless hole in the pattern.
Eli signed back.
But what about the modulators? Wasn't the whole point of them to prevent stalling?
Silas signed confidently.
Yeah, they'd use the modulators, if they still had your game modules, Ada's harmonics, and Faraday's stabilizers.
And they build their logic extensions without them.
Eli sat back, laughing as he signed.
They would have to gut the entire thing to fix that.
Lucy smiled and fetched them another cup of tea, while they excitedly resumed their work. It took them 2 more days to get it right. The stalling program acted like a ghost. It asked for a statistical adjustment buried inside a diplomatic proposal that disguised as a normal variation for border logistics and troop placement. Harmless and mundane by any standard. Just another move on the chessboard. Except for one variable. Tucked deep in the command was a recursive call, subtle, silent, and self-referencing. It wasn't an error in itself, it was simply incomplete. A logic request that had no straight answer, and no path to ignore. The replica engine passed it, then passed it again, and again. Each attempt to solve the problem led back to the same unresolved state, a circular dependency that constantly called for clarification, and always came up with none. The engine couldn't reject it, because it wasn't invalid. It couldn't confirm it, because it wasn't complete. It couldn't reroute or reprioritize, because the old punch card language lacked the shortcuts it invented for itself. No alarms went off. No steam hissed in protest. Just the smallest pause that kept extending. The engine hesitated, caught in a moment it couldn't leave. Not because it failed, but because it finally encountered something that required a human mind to move forward. And no one came. It stopped, not broken, not defeated, but paralyzed by the very rules it had rewritten. Frozen, in infinite hesitation. When they returned to London, no one noticed. They were just one of many in the rushing crowds. Eli followed Silas through the catacombs when no one was around. Eli tried to repress his returning coughs of blood. Lucy stayed behind in Louvain, keeping the other engines safe. She worked to lock every gate and misfile every crucial schematic, to give them time to disappear. Too many prying minds may raise too many questions. Under the London catacombs, the boys stood in the central chamber, in front of the London engine core, watching the punch cards move through the massive engine mouths. Silas's fingers trembled as he fed the engine the stalling program, under the guise of a minor optimization update. Barrels were adjusted. Some functions were redefined. The rest, the engine did on its own. As the engine processed, he signed to Eli.
We might have just broken everything.
Eli leaned on his cane beside him, signing boisterously.
Or maybe we finally showed it something it can't win.
Silas shook his head.
What if we just taught it how to hesitate, strategically? What if that's worse? What if it learns to wait, until it doesn't?
Eli only signed.
We'd better leave before the Queen sends for us.
He placed a hand briefly on Silas's shoulder, acknowledging a shared weight and uncertainty. They quickly gathered their things and whatever spare parts they could use, and rushed out of the catacombs. They made it back to Victoria Station. Crowds of people moved in blurry chaos, while an engine-driven pianola played various pieces of Handel, Haydn, and Beethoven. Silas waited at a ticket desk, as the clerk stalled for a second, waiting for her ticket engine to finish its printing. Its ink was frozen in the middle of the ticket. She briefly looked at Silas. He gave a patient smile, then glanced back at Eli further down the platform. Eli was watching the pianola closely, amazed at its precision. Every note reverberated through his body just as the engine's clacking once did. A system made for calculation was now freely recreating art. The clerk finally gave Silas their tickets, and they disappeared into the train just as it stopped into the station. For a week, nothing changed. Program outcomes and modifications spread between engines like normal. Then, messages arrived out of sequence. Command chains conflicted. Platoon movements stopped mid-process. Entire battle strategies returned no probable outcomes. Some reports never arrived at all. In Berlin, military supplies were stalled. In Istanbul, diplomats argued over contradictory treaty terms. In London, the engine began cross-referencing decisions it never made. The engines never crashed. They never defaulted to randomness. They simply paused, waiting for clarity that would never come. Across the channel, Belgium reported nothing. The neutered engines continued running, but not in constant calculation, only responding to what humans gave it. No nations declared victory. No enemy surrendered. There were no explosions, no final orders, just silence. For the first time in years, there was no next move. Not for the machines. Not for the men. Not even for the monarchs. The game hadn't ended, but it was finally locked in a stalemate.